I spend a lot of time doing contract work for the army. They contract a hell of a lot of mechanic work out to civilians. Saves on overhead, I guess. But that means I'll often be driving out into obscure training ranges out in the middle of nowhere to unfuck a mission-critical vehicle or piece of equipment that can't be easily brought back into the shop. It could take an hour or more to get out to some of the places these guys and gals, more and more these days, break their million-dollar toys. Most of the time the job is routine. Spend an hour or more getting to the site, do an assessment, fix it if I can, or get an M88 out there if I can't, head back to the shop, do the paperwork, call it a day. Or at least, that's how it went before they transferred me to this certain well-known installation in the California desert. Right off the bat, I felt like I was being punished. The folks I met at the shop on day one were nice enough on first blush, if a bit coy about the command climate. But they chided me for not knowing any of the rumors about the base and proceeded to tell me a menagerie of what amounted of ghost stories. They were just messing with the new guy, I thought. One guy, Mikey, even put on an Oscar-winning performance as he took me aside and tried to tell me about a bunch of unwritten rules and things to watch out for, building upon what the other tall tales the folks in the shop were weaving. Then, in ominous tones, he told me about the previous mechanic whose spot I was filling. Yeah, he went missing when he responded to a false call. No one else heard it over the radio, but he recorded it and went out. He should have known better. The unit reporting the call does even exist, and the training range was vacant. We have no idea why he went out there. He looked down sadly. We only know that we found his truck buried in a sand berm about 3 days later. No sign of him, or how his vehicle could have wound up buried like that. Just be careful. Things get weird out there. I rolled my eyes and shrugged it off. Talk about commitment to a prank. A few days later, I was still settling in and went out on my first two-job call. It was well past 100 degrees out, and both training areas I had to hit were at the extreme eastern edge of the base. As luck would have it, my utility vehicle didn't have working air conditioning either. Thankfully, the first job was an easy, if time-consuming fix. After packing up and getting ready to head out to the second site, I was required to report my time, position, and estimated arrival to the next site. I thought to myself, I could take the main roads, the long way around all the ranges, following procedure, and in doing so avoid entering an active training area, or I could take a shortcut across the training area and cut 40 minutes off my transit time to the next job. Since I knew the training area between me and my next call had actually been vacated this morning, and the heat was brutal, I decided to take the shortcut. I drove for what felt like hours in this intense heat. Under those conditions, they often say your eyes start playing tricks on you, and they aren't wrong. Strange, distorted forms appeared off in the distance, only to fade to nothing as I drove by. For miles and miles this went on. Then all of a sudden, I was brought out of my trance by a form that didn't dissipate. Breaking one of Mikey's silly cardinal rules, I pulled off the road to have a look and see if I could help. As I neared, I could see clearly that it was an old Jeep stuck in the sand. It seemed like the kind of Jeep that probably hadn't been used by line units since the early 80s at the latest. What the hell was it doing out here? I slowed down and pulled up next to the wreck, and I immediately felt my stomach drop as if I were weightless. Two limp forms rested in the front seats of the Jeep, and one laid nearby in the sand. My adrenaline spiked, and I jumped out of my truck rushing over to help. Despite the oppressive heat, a chill overcame me. The men were clearly dead, but they couldn't have been out here for more than a week by their appearances. Bloated tongues bulging out of their slack jaws, eyes half closed, and milky white skin, pale and taut. It took me a moment to note other details. The uniforms were wrong. They were a simple, solid green, and their helmets were wrong too. It didn't make any sense. There was no way a vehicle would have just sat out here, unnoticed for decades. Likewise, There was no way a unit would have dressed up in vintage uniforms, carrying vintage gear, just to fuck around out here. Then my eyes drifted to the vehicle. Against my better judgment, I walked around and inspected it. The water cans in the back were empty, and the whip radio antenna was missing from the mount on the rear of the vehicle. I stood there at a loss, knowing what probably happened to these men, but not understanding who it had happened to. I walked around to the front of the vehicle and stopped. The man who was laying in the dirt was gone. What the fuck? Hey, a voice called from the other side of the immobilized Jeep. Hey, can you give us a hand? We're stuck here. I heard the driver's side door open and close, but I couldn't see what was happening as they went to work trying to free the Jeep. Hey, the voice called again, more urgent and louder. Hey, can you give us a hand? We're stuck here. I glanced to my truck, still apparently undisturbed, only about 10 meters away. The problem, though, was that the only way to get to my truck was to go right by the passenger side door and cross the line of sight of whatever it was that I had stumbled upon. I wanted to run, but found my feet too heavy to lift. So I used all my will to take another step backwards, and just then, I stepped on the one goddamn piece of vegetation within 50 meters of me. Time slowed. The sounds of strain and digging coming from the far side of the Jeep stopped. For a mere second, there was complete silence before a grotesque visage slowly peered out from the passenger side window, and its cloudy eyes locked onto mine. Hey, it called, its voice muffled by its swollen tongue. Before the shock wore off and I could begin running towards my truck, its deathly brethren came around at a trot, blocking my only clear path of escape. Hey, they called in unison, and I sprinted faster than I had ever done before. I was driven by mad panic. Somehow I made it past them, barely slipping through their grasp. I jumped into the truck, turned over the ignition which caught on the first try, and threw it into reverse. I was peeling backwards just as one of those things grabbed onto the grill of my truck, and it began to climb up and over the hood. I swerved left and right, trying to throw it off to no avail. It tore into the hood for purchase and just kept right on coming. It anticipated and braced for every clumsy maneuver. And just as its hand firmly grasped the driver's side view mirror, it began to shift and fade from reality. I was back on the main road. It was gone, and its compatriots stood off the main road as mute statues. They watched for moments before returning to their ceaseless tasks. I drove onward, leaving them behind, and ignored anything and everything else along the way. When I finally arrived at the next job, the group of soldiers waiting in the shade next to their broken down M113 hurried over and helped me out of my vehicle. I heard muffled voices and looks of concern as I was led to the shade. Heat stroke. Hey doc, we're gonna need to stick him. As I laid there and let them push about a liter of fluid into me, I stared at the front of my truck, now visible to me for the first time since the encounter. It was pretty fucked up. Handholds were cleaved from the metal paneling itself. Then I faded out. I woke up in a small clinic with both Mikey and my supervisor waiting nearby as a cold stream of saline fed into my arm. Don't break the rules again, my supervisor said. You are lucky to be alive, and you'll be restricted to light duty until you recuperate, just so you know. What happened? I asked, unsure of my experience. Well, based on how fucked up your truck was, and the fact that you were able to get to your second job site in under 2 minutes from your check-in, I'd say you broke the rules. It was real? Mikey and my supervisor glanced at one another for a moment. Well, yeah, absolutely. I thought I was pretty upfront about that. Just thought you were fucking with me. I saw guys, corpses, stuck out there from another time. It looked like they got lost out there long ago. Well, that happens. All too often, actually. I can't tell you if they are echoes or what, or how time can cease to have meaning when you break the rules. But they were people. That I'm sure of. I guess they never let go. They never gave up hope. That desperation echoes through time. But it's only one of the more benign things out there. They left me alone, confident in my recovery, while I contemplated my supervisor's last words. I should probably write these rules down,